Hi, Sigfried. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. We've got a nice sunny, breezy day here on the West Coast in my little town of Ocean Shores. I'm feeling fine.
Fantastic. Well, thanks for joining me. This is Sigfried Trent. He is the current lead writer and game designer for Everyday Heroes from Evil Genius Games, and he's worked on other games in the past for Kobold Press. But I'm just excited to have him here tonight to talk about Everyday Heroes. So with Everyday Heroes is a system that uses D20 and modern D20 5e as its base, but then it departs from there. Can you tell people how it's different and what should draw them into your system since it is different?
Yeah, sure. So we are a spiritual successor to D20 Modern, which means that the owner, Dave Scott, was like, hey, I want to bring D20 Modern back to gamers, right? Like, it's been too long since we've had kind of a really cool mainstream modern action role-playing game. So that was the spiritual mission. And then the technical mission was to make it compatible with 5e because that's what everybody's playing and that's what most people know how to play. And this is it's kind of a broad game. We want people to just sit down, have fun, have a good time. So using a familiar rule system to bring back the feeling of D20 Modern was kind of the mission for Everyday Heroes. So yeah, so that's the idea. If you know how to play Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, you kind of already know how to play our game. There's definitely differences between 5e and Everyday Heroes because as a game mechanic, I really feel like the mechanics of the game should be used in a way to give you the feel of play that we're trying to achieve. And so our feel is like modern action cinema. So Fast and Furious, John Wick, Rambo, anything in the last 50 years of action cinema, kind of breezy, fast paced, a little over the top, lots of explosions. That's sort of the feel that our game goes for, mayhem and wildness, right? So Dungeons and Dragons 5e is a fantasy game and it has certain mechanics that give it a fantasy feel. So we changed a few things around to give our game a very different feel. So when you read the game, you'll recognize the rules. You roll a d20, you're trying to hit a certain number, you're going to add a proficiency bonus, you're going to add an ability score, that kind of thing. That hasn't really changed. But little things around the edges are relatively different. The way we do armor is very different because we don't have guys walking around in plate mail. We've got shirtless action heroes, right? And things like in our game, everybody gets something called dive for cover, right? So
Mm.
if a grenade's going off or the building is collapsing, in combat, you get a chance to just run for it, make that dramatic leap to safety and get out of danger as a reaction in the game for the mechanics. So we have little things like that. So we just tweak stuff here and there. The way you build characters is kind of different because modern day characters have jobs, right? So part of building a character is to pick a profession. It's going to set a wealth level for you. We don't have people running around counting how many gold pieces they have or how many dollar bills are in their pocket because people have salaries or they got bank accounts or they got investments, whatever it is. We don't pay a lot of attention to that because it's not an important scene in an action adventure, right? So
Hmm.
Everyday Heroes isn't about collecting treasures. It's about going on wild adventures, staying alive, and beating up bad guys and saving the world or whoever or whatever it is you're trying to do. So a little bit of a different feel in those areas. So the mechanics of the game will reflect that wherever we can.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite class yourself that you play then as you kind of vicariously live out these action movies?
Yeah, so I'm a pretty heavy role player. So when I love mechanics, but I also just like to ham it up. So the Icon is maybe one of my favorite classes to play. They're charming hero, so they're based on charisma. Way we've set
Mm-hmm.
up the game, there's archetypes. There's smart heroes, tough heroes, strong heroes. I'm gonna forget them because I did them out of order. Agile heroes, smart heroes, wise heroes, and charming heroes. So, and they have an ability score they based, and part of this is just to make it really easy to build a hero. So like if you give yourself a good charisma as a charming hero, you're probably fine. You can definitely build and crunch on the characters in Everyday Heroes, but we also made them so you can just kind of pick your prime ability score and just get going and play the character you want to play. So anyway, charming hero, the Icon's kind of a jack of all trades character. I love bard like characters.
Yeah.
Charming heroes have a little pool of influence dice that they can spend to do what are called tricks. They're just kind of little shticks that they have that they're very good at in combat. like one of the charming hero the icon can do is the magnetic personality, right? This is kind of like your rock star character or your movie star, Johnny Cage sort of a character, right? They're too cool for school.
Mhm.
And so you just in combat or out of combat to distract people, you just turn on your charisma button and you smile brightly or you insult somebody terribly and they are naturally drawn to move towards you, either out of love or hate. Just depends on the situation, but they move towards you, and that can set up your allies for an advantageous situation, right? So
Yeah.
they have stuff like that. It's a character that's very selfish in the way they're written, but their abilities are actually very group oriented, and that
Mm.
they're setting up other people, and they build off of their friends. Like there's one called "Hey, watch this," right? Which they can only do if somebody's around to see them do it. Otherwise, they're just not so inspired to excel upon themselves, and that gives them
Yeah.
advantage on an ability check that they're making. So
Yeah.
uh yeah, every hero's got a lot of different talents, we call them, and things, shticks and things that they can do just to make them a fun kind of larger than life character in the game. So icon's kind of my gig because I like characters with a lot of personality, and that's sort of what that class is all about.
Hmm. Did you enjoy writing that type of character as much?
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, yeah. I mean, like, how do you approach that writing process? Is it methodical for you, or do you just get inspired, or what goes on there for you?
It's a mix. So I've played Dungeons and Dragons for like 30 years, so the
Mhm.
D20 system through all its incarnations is just kind of part of my blood, as it were,
Mhm.
right? So I understand the mechanics of that system really well at a kind of intuitive level. And I
Mm.
really like fifth edition. I think it's kind of my favorite of the D20, things. So on a technical level, I try to really be very precise when I'm writing rule books and rules to
Mm.
make sure there's not ambiguity. I mean, some of it always creeps in. It's tough when you're writing a big, huge rule book, but
Mhm.
I really try to do that and to achieve not what you'd call perfect balance, because then everything would be boring, right?
Right.
But a balance in the sense that every class you can pick is fun and effective, right? Will give you tools to either influence the plot of the game that's going on or to be a badass in combat of some kind, right? So
Mhm.
that kind of balance where one hero doesn't feel totally overpowering, but every hero feels kind of awesome, right? That's sort of the level we're going for. But then there's a lot of creativity and just kind of elbow grease, right? So a lot of the time your first pass is just inspiration, like what am I trying to do? What's the scene in my head that this hero is about? Who are they? And then we start to kind of, okay, well, what does a person like that do? And then how does that translate into mechanics of the game? And then we just do pass after pass of, hey, how can we make it more fun? Right? Can
Mhm.
we change the name just a bit? Like we try to name all the talents that you have, like extra attack. It's a little boring, a little technical. So we call that advanced combat training, right? Something a little
Yeah.
more exciting. And even just by naming things a little bit more of an exciting name, you're going to inspire players to have fun in the game. So they see something on that character sheet and it inspires them in a moment in the game. They're like, oh, I can do this thing. It's perfect for this situation, right? And then they do it and they feel great. And so, yeah, even little things like what you call the abilities is important for creating that big sense of fun and inspiring people to get creative. Ultimately it's the game master or the players who make a role-playing game what it is,
Yeah.
right? But the
Absolutely.
rules are there as a framework and inspiration, right? So we try to pack everything with as much inspiration as we can and make as solid and reliable a framework as we can, right? So those two things together. And that just, it takes a lot of iteration. So for me, it's
Mhm.
just like read it again, read it again, get other people to read it, get other people to comment on it, take in ideas, listen to them, do it again, right? So the more you do that, the better it'll get, because we're making different products and they have different iterations of our rules. And I'll tell you, every time I write the rules, I make them a little bit better than they were before. Not necessarily changing the rules, but changing how we describe it
Mhm.
and how we present it so it's easier to understand. And that's just an ongoing process.
Yeah. Well, and related to that, I had read that you had a very large initial play test group, right? Like 600, 650, something like that. They,
Oh, that may have grown in the telling. I'm not
oh,
sure.
okay. Okay. Well,
My memory, it might be that. My memory is more like 350 or something. It was quite a
okay.
lot though. Like and when we did that, there were three of us. the owner and two designers. Maybe
Yeah.
we might have had our art director slash layout person on board by then, right?
Y-
So suddenly, Dave says, "Well, I
Yeah.
got like 350 playtesters for you," and I'm in the middle of trying to write a core rulebook in 4 months, and I'm like, "Oh my god, what am I doing with all these people?" Right?
Yeah.
I got to make surveys, and then I got to make playtest scenarios. So Goober, who's the other lead designer for Everyday Heroes, we pretty much made the rulebook together. We sat down and made playtests for people to play. And then
Hmm.
I made a whole bunch of surveys, to get people to read the material, tell us what they think about it, then
Hmm.
play these scenarios, tell us what happened, tell us what they think about it. So we used, some online software to collate all the results, and then I would just pour over all that, taking the ratings and averaging them and pulling out highlighted quotes, saying how many people expressed that this was too powerful, how many people said that, this was boring, to get a bunch of data, and then we would use that to make changes, right? We'd
Hmm.
look
Hmm.
and we evaluate. Just because somebody says it's broken doesn't mean it's broken, right? But it
Right.
means you
Right.
should look and make
Right.
sure it's not broken, right? So
Yeah.
and there were, definitely the playtesters catch a lot of things and gave us a lot of ideas. Sometimes they just give you new ideas. They're like, "Oh, would it be? I wish I saw something like this in there." And I'm like, "Oh, well, I'm a designer. It's pretty cool. I could just add that in there." What do you know?
Yeah.
So and I try to be really. I'm always on forums and our Discord trying to interact with players. For me, the playtest is forever, right? It
Mm.
it doesn't stop until we're done publishing.
Yeah.
And since we want to publish more games, I'm still playtesting all the time. um but yeah, that initial group was really helpful, because you're just launching a new system. Now we know 5e, right? It's 90% the same, so there's certain things you don't have to worry about so much. It's a tested system. And
Hmm.
I went out and scoured the internet for what do people not like about 5e, what would they change if they could change something, right?
Hmm.
Because hey, I have the opportunity to change a little bit, right? We try
Right.
to maintain compatibility, so you could bring a character or an NPC in the game and they would just work, right? Like
Hmm.
the balance scaling, and that's something that already had a lot of time spent on it by others. So there are certain places where there's issues with the current game for that, right? Like high level play, we don't
Yeah.
really have that. We go up to level 10, so we avoid some of 5e's what I think are its biggest weaknesses, which is when you get up into hundreds of hit points and the game kind of slogs out. So we try to avoid that. But and lots of little things, but we want to maintain compatibility so that people could just use material that's out there. If you want to drop your machine gun toting action heroes into a fantasy world, or you want to have a wizard fight Nazis, go for it, right? That kind of compatibility in all our products, all the different movie licenses we have, all the rules are compatible with each other. Now, I don't suggest people take all the rules and try to play with them all at once. It would be overwhelming. Our game's like a big toolbox, right? So we
Hmm.
got core. Like we were just kind of in a meeting defining that a little while ago. How there's a foundation of rules, right? These are the you cannot really play without them. Then there's the core rules, which is what we suggest for a given genre. Our core rule book is the modern world. So these are the rules we think are best in a modern world game. But then each of our cinematic adventures has additional rules that make that setting come alive and feel like that setting. So Highlander, you have to have epic duels between people, and a one-on-one 5e, like a one-on-one duel,
Hmm.
not super exciting, right? So we created a system of dueling to make a little mind game between people if you're going to do a one-on-one fight, because the system otherwise isn't that great for it. And we have rules for beheading people and things like that, which you don't normally need in regular D&D, but are essential for that setting. So, but if you were to take all the rules from all the cinematic adventures, compatible or no, try to play with them all at once, your game would be like so much to look up, right? It'd be a bit much.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like something like a Jaeger feels godlike. So it's interesting to say that like that tops out at level 10. To put a constraint on it, like what first of all, what's the relationship between the little, like the crow going to a Jaeger or King Kong? How does that integration work for your games?
Yeah, so this is kind of the territory that Goober put together, but I can certainly talk about it. Is we worked on Pacific Rim and King Kong at the same time, and we want all our systems to be compatible. So it's like, well, we have to have the scaling work across both, use the same rules, but work for both genres, right?
Mhm.
And they're kind of different. So Pacific Rim is about 300-foot tall robots fighting giant monsters, right? Or
Mhm.
200 foot Yeah, they range in size. As where King Kong, yeah, look, the characters are not fighting King Kong. That's not how this is supposed to work, right? The heroes are human beings, and the monsters are titanic forces beyond their control. That's part of the theme of the MonsterVerse to some degree, right?
Right.
Uh, so the way you use those rules is pretty different. In King Kong, you're mostly not player versus environment. It's the environment fighting each other, the players trying to survive the cataclysm and influence the outcome of the battle between the Titans. As we're in Pacific Rim, you are one of the Titans and you are
Yeah.
fighting the monsters directly, right? So essentially, we use the same system as we use for two people fighting each other. It's the attack
Mm-hmm.
numbers, defense, all that. You can almost think of it like when your hero is in a Jaeger with your pilot, your co-pilot, you are essentially wearing a giant suit of armor with a bunch of weapons on it, right? And you're fighting monsters. They happen to be 200 feet tall. The terrain is different. The milieu and the feeling is very different, but the mechanics really the same. So it's completely compatible. In fact, we're putting out something called the 2023 rules. I think it's actually now called the Vault Rules Compendium Volume 1. I used to call it 2023 Rules Compendium, but it takes all the rules we published this year outside of the core book, puts them together. And it's got rules for giant robots and monsters in scale. Now, for Kong and Pacific Island, we only needed a Titanic scale, which is like 300 foot tall or 250 to 300 foot tall creatures, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or entities, whatever you want to call them. Combatants, we usually say in the rule books. Um, However, for the compendium, we're like, hey, well, why not? Like, because our rules are really the same. We'll talk about, Demi, you want to play little ants? Great, no problem. Like, here's what you need to do. You want to play, let's say just 50-foot tall robots, so a little bit more like your anime mecha or
Mm-hmm.
something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then we have got a scale for that too. So we have a giant scale, Titanic scale, a small scale for like toy soldiers, and a miniature scale for like micro adventures, right?
Mm-hmm.
There aren't a lot of rules surrounding this. Most of the rules are just sort of, how does one scale interact with another scale? Like normally it's just not designed for that. Like little 6 foot tall humans fighting 300-foot tall monsters, honestly, not a lot of meaningful interaction that's going to happen. Monster steps on you, you're gone, right? You try to hit them with any weapon, they barely notice that you were there, right? You have to be using some very large weapons doing a whole lot of damage. So we do have a little bit of scaling just in case people try these things, but mostly we're like, yeah, no. The main part of those rules are just to convert measurements. So if I have a rifle at normal scale, it has a range of 1 mile or something.
Mm-hmm.
If we scale that rifle up to be a 200-foot long cannon, what does that range turn into?
Yeah.
Right. And so it's mostly about turning range and distance numbers that are measured in feet in the base game into spaces. And then the spaces are arbitrary at any different scale. And so that there's not a lot more than that. So, what happens if these two things interact, and then how do you convert distances so that you can do narration? Other than that, same rules,
Yeah.
right? Because they don't need to be different. It's combat. Now, you'll do little tricks, like so for Pacific Rim with the kaiju. If you do the scaling, like if we take, is a little different with like if you take an ant and you scale it up and then you change its movement. Well, it might suddenly be moving at what would 8 squares, right? It's pretty
Mm-hmm.
fast, but we actually slowed down the kaiju, right? So if you converted them back down to scale, they're pretty slow moving
Mm-hmm.
to give
Mm-hmm.
a sense of giantness, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so as where the creatures in Kong are a little more vital, like King Kong leaps, right? He's
Mm-hmm.
not that slow and plodding. So he's super fast compared to like kaiju in the way we've described them. But because that's just the way he's presented in the movie, he's pretty quick on his feet. Is where like Godzilla is more like a kaiju. He just sort of stomps unless he's in the ocean, right?
Right.
And
Right.
smushes
Right.
things. So there's little tricks you do like that when you're making the bespoke content for the setting that might be a little different than just the straight conversion, because it just gives it, again, that feel that you're going for. Just sort of like if you're slower, your mind says, well, it must be big, right? So we slow them down just a tiny bit.
Yeah. I mean, so is there? I mean, that covers a lot. Are there? I'm going to ask a slightly different question than I had sent you. So
Sure. No, that's all good.
I had sent you the question if you could gain any IP that's not currently run by another company. But Is there like an action hero that would be kind of problematic, but you would still like to work with, if you could gain that licensing?
Kind of. So we had a little
Did,
challenge with, say, like Rambo,
mhm.
because
Yeah.
like our core rule book covers Rambo pretty well.
Mhm.
We got guns, we got helicopters, we got um military type characters.
Yeah.
So you technically don't need a source book to play Rambo with everyday heroes. It's really close. So what you do is you dive into little details, right? So I created in the core rule book, we have a career that's called military, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
You're in the military. Well, in reality, the military is a wide field of many different things. You could be a
Yeah.
computer hacker, you could be, a bunch of different stuff. Special forces like Rambo. So in that book, we dive into details, and so I have a military career path, or special forces specifically career path, where are you going to be enlisted, or are you going to be an officer? Which branch are you going to be in? What type of special forces training do you want to receive? What badges are you going to get? Stuff like that. So you can dive into the minutia of the setting that really makes the setting come alive and feel kind of in depth and fun, that you wouldn't do in a core rule book, because you're trying to kind of cover the widest spaces possible. So it's a little challenging sometimes to do something that's very close to what you've already done and yet
Hmm.
make it feel really different. So I can't name like something specific I wouldn't want to do. Like, I always find a way. Now,
Sure.
our fans love to suggest new IPs for us, right? And some of them get cheeky and they're like, well, I don't know. I'm trying to Eraserhead, right? When you do Eraserhead, I'm like, yeah, oh, gee, how would I make that a role playing game? I have no idea, right? David Lynch art movie, that's pretty hard to do.
Yeah.
But almost anything can work so long as it has a feeling of adventure,
Mhm.
and people are out there. So we got a lot of questions. How do you do Crow with a party? Well, it's actually not that hard. There's a bunch of approaches. You can have Risen who work with mortal allies. You could have multiple Risen who are gathered together to enact revenge on the same person. You could have Risen, like in our adventure, who are being manipulated by an outside power to come together in order to steal their powers.
Hmm.
So there's all kinds of different choices. You just got to get creative, look at the property, bake down its elements, and then extrapolate out what kind of adventures you can have. So um, almost nothing is impossible, but certainly some are easier than others. Kong Skull Island is a very easy book to write. You go to a wild tropical island and there are crazy monsters there. You need to explore, deal with natural hazards, and deal with interesting monsters. And that's adventure, right? Like, it just kind of in a way writes itself. As
Yeah.
where some of the others are a little more challenging. A Highlander, you're dealing not with time travel, but telling stories over the course of centuries, right?
Right.
And that requires some very special narrative game master techniques, and lots of different things that we can write about and really help the game master make the setting alive. So it really depends on the book where the focus goes, depending on what is needed. And we've talked about some where, maybe we'll not just do a cinematic adventure, we'll do a whole game around it, that uses the everyday hero core rule system, but is really built out for its own thing. So we're going to
Yeah.
do the spiritual successor to Urban Arcana, which we call Everyday Arcana. And hopefully you'll be able to see that by Gen Con next year. And that's going to be its own whole game, right? It is based on Everyday Heroes, it's the same rule system, but it will be presented not as a little adventure expansion, but as its own whole setting and system.
That sounds, yeah, that sounds interesting. Um what are you looking forward to the most with that, as far as players encountering it?
Well, for me, the exciting part is how are we going to do magic?
Mm.
So, there's a lot of possibilities. The way you see magic in 5e is not the only way to do it. In fact, every edition of D&D's done magic a little differently.
Yeah.
Certain through lines and things. And
Hmm.
so we have this creativity. I believe Goober is set out to try and do a casting magic system for every one of our 6 archetypes. So there'll be
Hmm.
strong heroes. They'll have some kind of strong strength or physical based magic. Tough heroes, maybe blood magic. So there's lots of different possibilities there. And that always really excites me. Game mechanics and world building and storytelling are all a heady brew when they mix together. They're best when they're all deeply entwined to some
Yeah.
degree. And so I'm just really excited to see where the creative paths lead us. When doing Everyday Heroes, it's set in the modern world. We kind of know where we're going with it. But when you're creating an original IP, as we're doing for that one, and when you're setting the groundwork for how does magic work in our system, or how different ways that it can work, that's pretty exciting. And I don't know where that's going to be yet. And I love a little adventure and chaos. So if I don't know where the destination is completely, I mean, I know we want it to be fun and awesome, but that's exciting for me, right? Just to see what happens and to see what other designers are going to do in that system, and then how I interact with them. Yeah, it's good stuff.
Yeah. I mean, what immediately comes to mind for me is I would love to play a good Hellboy system. So like an integration of that cinematic experience that you're talking about, plus like just him smashing some stuff that could be really fun. But um,
Yeah,
as
action
you're,
Lovecraft, essentially. Yeah, it's kind of what Hellboy is. Yeah, that would be great.
yeah, yeah. So, um, I mean, did you ever read the comics at all?
Not in detail. I've seen a few of
Okay.
them. Mostly, I've seen the various films. So
Yeah, yeah. The, anyway, they're fun. It'd be
oh
fun
yeah,
to
for
play
sure. I
through
mean,
that.
I think that would be, it's super creative. I love any setting that's just a high level of creativity.
Mm,
And it's quite possible that Everyday Arcana will lend itself well to that. It's
mm,
Well, we had a setting contest, and we'll have kind of at least one official setting that'll come with the game. The intent for the game is that it could be used for any kind of urban fantasy,
mhm,
right? Where you're mixing magic in the modern world, and Hellboy's got quite
mm,
a lot of that, so it
yeah,
could work pretty well.
cool. Um, just one more question, and then anything else that you want to share.
Okay.
What do you enjoy about working with other writers? How does that how has that process changed, and especially with Evil Genius, because this is a whole new company, and Dave's doing some different stuff. What have you enjoyed there at Evil Genius? Because you guys are all kind of spread out, right? Or
Yeah, it's not
okay.
we don't have an office that we're all hanging out in. We're just all over the country and kind of rapidly growing all the time here. So I don't get to work with everybody what I wish I could.
Mm,
Uh so because I would like to have my finger in every pie, but we have so many pies now, it gets a bit more difficult. I just love interacting with other people. I love
mm,
their using their creativity to enhance my creativity, and using my creativity and skills to enhance what they're doing. I'm like, oh, I see what you're doing there. Hey, I got another idea you could add to that. I think it would really just brighten it up and add a little pizzazz there. So that's just really fun. It's hard to be a creative in a vacuum. Like I don't know, maybe it's good for some people, but some people are like, oh, I go the deprivation changer and I take away all my senses and my creative juices boil over. I can see that. I can see that happening, but it doesn't work that way for me. I
yeah.
have to be connected to everything, right?
Mm,
And everything's moving. Like people bemoan social media, but I love it. Like it's a constant feed of human ideas, right? Just
mhm,
swirling around out there. And when I see a gem, I can pluck it and use it as part of whatever creation that I'm making, right? So
mm,
so yeah, the more the merrier. Although, like anybody, I do have my time where I like to just sort of turn out the lights, focus on my, that's like the craft part of the work, right? When the
mhm, mhm,
creativity is done, now the writing begins, and just making sure all the words are clear and the technical aspects of it, and how do we order this so it's the most rational and the easiest to learn and absorb. So right now I'm trying to write a version of our rules that's for people who've never played a role-playing game
mm,
before. And I'll tell you, that's a very different structure to efficiently teach a game than teaching people who really already know what role-playing is, right? You can take a
mhm,
lot of shortcuts. Our core rulebook does teach people how to role play. You can approach it from the ground up. And I'm very proud to say I've seen a few people who said Everyday Heroes is their first role-playing game, and nothing makes my heart flutter,
yeah.
maybe other than my wife, quite like that, right? Like that's super exciting to have to touch somebody kind of in that way with something that I've
Mm,
done. So that's an amazing honor. Um,
yeah.
but that's not the first audience it was designed for. I wanted to make sure to include them, but it's really written for people more familiar with role-playing games, right? And has some shortcuts that allow them to speedily get through the book, right? But this version that we're writing is really for people who maybe have never encountered a role-playing game. So it takes a different mindset, a different approach. That's kind of what
Yeah.
I'm at this week, is putting that together. But it's also exciting because, like I said, it's more opportunity to bring people into the hobby, and that always gets me going.
Yeah. What else? Just if you were to say that this is what I want somebody to know about what I'm writing here, uh, yeah, whatever. This is your carte blanche.
Sure. Well, for me, it's about the love. I love role playing games. I love playing. I love creativity. I want people to enjoy my game. I know not everybody will or everybody can. Like, it's not everything is for everyone, but um, I just want you to know, like, I love role playing games. I put as much love into these books as I possibly can so that they are as excellent as I can make them in the time that I have. And I welcome any and all feedback on them. My games are not perfect, so I love to hear from the fans, little things that they think could be changed for the better. And I collect all those. And every time we're going to do a new version of the rules, I read over there and see if there's things I can pull in to make things just a little better, a little more clear, or just cooler and more fun. Right. So I love that kind of interactivity. Maybe I'm still a little new as a writer, so I don't have 20 projects that I can't remember yet. This is my baby, so come on in, join the party. Right, that's kind of what I would say. You're absolutely welcome. Your ideas. We really encourage fans to make their own fan material. People are like, "Well, I prefer to do it this way," and I'm like, "I officially endorse the way that you like to do it, right? As a good way to play. So please enjoy it." So we're really open like that, and we just want everybody to have a good time. That's our number one mission.
That's awesome. How do people join the Discord?
Oh, that's a good question. I think the best thing to do is go to our website,
Okay.
evilgeniusgames.com.
Mhm.
And it is getting updated as we speak here, I think. But you should find a link to the Discord under the community. There'll be a community tab. Check that out. You'll find out how to get in on the Discord. It's a very welcoming bunch. The homebrew channel is especially active with people making their own rules for their own settings in their own worlds, and also properties that they really love, right? And so we really, like I said, try to make a toolbox for people to do that. So that's the hottest action over on our Discord. But you can also talk to me. I'll respond to almost any comment as long as I see it. There's a lot of chatter, so sometimes I miss things. But if you tag me, I'm like Sig Trent, I think, on Discord.
Cool.
Easy to find. Yeah. Anywhere you see me on the internet, feel free to say hi.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Sig. It was really a pleasure to talk to you. And I'm looking forward to seeing what you all do. I know you probably have more things up your sleeve with Dave's connections with Hollywood and marketing. That's
We
probably
are
coming.
endlessly ambitious at Evil Genius Games, as any evil genius should be.
Very cool. Thank you again.
My pleasure.